Hey there everyone. I've been a little bit sick lately, so that's why I haven't been able to get the distribution reviews out of me. But basically, I have no distribution review today, but I did have an important topic I'd like to raise with you just now. I've been a little bit sick lately, by the way, and that's not the important topic. But yeah, I've been sick for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm only just now recovering to the point where I feel like I can do a video. So again, it's not a distribution review. Some of you might be disappointed by that, but nonetheless, I think what I'm about to discuss, which is the first in probably a 3-part set of audio. I think it's fairly important. So yeah, I'll begin now. So we find ourselves here in 2016, and basically with our mobile devices, things are getting a little bit, I guess, in my view, a bit clouded about free and open source software. Some of us are infrequent free and open source software users. Some of us use it daily and consider it to be the lifeblood of our daily computer use. And further, some of us don't even know what it is. Even if they were to use it, they wouldn't even know. So, basically, this formal monologue is, for people who feel they have insufficient knowledge about free and open source software, or they want to know about free and open source software, or there's people who are simply entertained by free and open source software discourse. So basically, I would say for those people who use Apple and Android devices, believe it or not, you are actually using free and open source software. You just don't realize it. Some of you do realize it, but more on a sort of intellectual level where you go, oh, yes, that piece of software is free and open source by license or whatever like that. But yeah. So as I said above, this is not a distribution review, and it's not going to be a blatant criticism of proprietary software, although all of you would most likely know what my personal preferences are regarding software. But before I introduce any new terms, I think it would be a good point at this time to explain what the previously used terms mean in their dictionary sense. So I'll provide links to these definitions in the description below. So free software. Free software is, the definition, although that's not on the Free Software website now, Free Software Foundation's website, from 0 to 3. The numbering system actually does start from 0 to 3, so it actually made sense when they kept that there. It's everyone else who doesn't understand that. For some reason the schools, preschools, high schools, whatever, we all get taught count 1, 2, not 0, 1, 2. Well, the fact of the matter is the numbering system at the Cartesian plane, I guess you could call it, for positive and negative numbers starts at 0. So anyway, that point aside, 0 to 3, 4 freedoms. So basically, the first freedom 0, is the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. So, if for some very strange reason you find some interesting printer software, whatever, and you want to run it in your refrigerator, then go and do it. If it's free software, they'll let you do it. Okay? Doesn't matter. The freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. So basically, access to source code is a precondition for this. So why is it a precondition? Well, basically, there's a difference between knowing how software works and knowing how it operates. When you go through the menus or you go and look at the config file or something like that, you don't know how it works. And anyone, you know how it operates, but you don't know how it works. Anyone who's done any programming before, not that I've had to deal with APIs, but anyone who understands software knows the difference between being able to use an API and actually being able to see how the API is implemented. Two different things. So with free software, you not only get to use the API, but you get to find out how the API works. You see, it's fantastic. Okay, so also the freedom 2 is, and that's the third freedom, is that excuse you have to excuse my cough. I'm going to be fighting through this the whole way. So it's the freedom to distribute copies so that you can help your neighbor. So the idea is just basically you got a nice fresh download of, I don't know, VLC or something like that, and your neighbor doesn't know about VLC, and with free software you have the right to distribute the source code to your neighbor, and they can use that. You see, and you can distribute the binary, and they have the freedom to use it. Okay, freedom to just redistribute so you can help your neighbor. So we have freedom 3, which is the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others. So in other words, you go, oh, okay, there's this cool change I can make to VLC or whatever, and bingo, you can, benefit the whole community by, making your changes and then distributing those changes. And again, source code obviously is a precondition. And we have open source software, which, believe it or not, is actually a different beast, although it won't sound it by its definition. There's a bit of history there, but we'll talk about that soon. So open source software is, basically the first bit is that, free distribution, free redistribution. The license will not restrict any party from selling or giving away the software as a component or an aggregate software distribution containing programs from several different sources. The license shall not require a royalty or other fee for such a sale. The source code. Well, the program must include the source code and must allow distribution in source code as well as compiled form. Where some form of a product is not distributed with source code, there must be a well-publicized means of obtaining the source code for no more than a reasonable reproduction cost, preferably downloading via the internet. Makes sense in this modern day. And that's without charge. So no paywalls just to get the source code, thank you very much. Well, not huge paywalls anyway, $50 or whatever. Okay, so the source code must be in the preferred form in which a programmer would modify the program. So in other words, you don't just turn all the variable names to I's, J's, and X's and Y's and whatever, And the source code must be, not obfuscated. So it's, obfuscating code is not allowed, and also intermediate forms such as the output of a preprocessor or translator, and they're not allowed. So in other words, some compilers will, upload an object file. That's not very good because it's only part of the story. And the other thing too is, things like some outputs, some compilers, they have an intermediate stage. It's just C code, but it's not going to be human written C code. It's going to be C code written by a machine. So again, not very good. Okay, derive works. So the license must allow for modification, and derived works. It must allow them to be distributed under the same terms of the license of the original software. The integrity of the author's source code. So in other words, the license may restrict source code from being distributed in modified form only if the license allows the distribution of patch files with the source code for the purpose of modifying the program at build time. The license must explicitly permit distribution of software built from the modified source code. The license may require derived works to carry a different name or version number from the original software. So you can see cases of that. That's a little bit of a troubling one, that one there, where you kind of allow, you sort of giving rights back to the author's, source code. I don't know. It's a bit of a funny one, that one. Excuse me for a moment. I'm not going to edit this out. It just takes too much time to do that via FFmpeg. I tend to do my editing via FFmpeg, but hey, in future I might have to step it up with Kden Live. Anyway, moving on. No discrimination against persons or groups. So a license must not say, for example, only right-handers can use it. If you're left-hander, no license. Sorry. Okay. No discrimination against fields of endeavour. So the license must not restrict anyone from making use of the program in a specific field of endeavour. So, for example, it may not restrict the program from being used in a business or from being used for genetic research. Now, that's the other thing, which is, being a bit passive there, I guess, when they're saying that, but I guess it's also the military. This one here will cover weapons use as well. Okay. Distribution of the license. The rights attached to the program must apply to all to whom the program is redistributed without the need of execution of additional license by those parties. So, in other words, you can't sort of do the bait and switch. Oh, those people got the software, they need an additional license. The license must not be specific to a product. So the rights attached to the program must not depend on the programs being part of a particular software distribution. So if the program is extracted from that distribution and used or distributed within the terms of the program's license, all parties to whom the program is redistributed should have the same rights as those that are granted in conjunction with the original software distribution. So I guess it's a non-contamination clause there. License must not restrict other software. So the license must not place restrictions on other software that is distributed along with the licensed software. For example, the license must not insist that the other programs distributed in the same medium must be open source software. So for example, if we have an open source implementation of the awk interpreter, then we can't just say that open source awk interpreter can only be distributed with open source platforms. So can't say it can't be on proprietary Unix. The license must be technology neutral. So no provision of the license may be predicated on any individual technology or style or interface. So in other words, you can't just say, for example, well, here's the source code. It's all it's all open source except if you use it on ARM. You're allowed to use it on x86, but you must not use it on ARM. No, that wouldn't be not open source software. Now, let's talk about proprietary software, and this is a bit paraphrased from various sources, including Wikipedia. But basically, it's this: computer software for which the software's publisher or other persons retain the legal monopolies granted by authorities, meaning the government, or enforced by courts and things like that. The rights, although known as intellectual property, should be separated into their proper legal delimiters. Okay, copyright and patent. It should also be known that sometimes the use of trademark in software can effectively render it proprietary, unless those trademarks are removed. So, for example, Red Hat Enterprise Linux distribution can only be distributed. The source code can only be distributed if the trademarks are removed from the source code. So that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because that's mixing an issue of copyright with trademark. Now, as you can see from the above, there are some fundamental differences between free software, open source software, and proprietary software. I'd say that in a lot of cases, open source software is very, very, it's very direct. It's very, how shall we say it, descriptive of the rights, whereas free and open source software makes some. Free software makes some, fairly open statements, for fairly, open-ended statements. But they do say that the source code is a precondition for freedom 1 and freedom 4. So yeah, it's you can see definitely that there's a big difference between the first two and proprietary software. So in the next video, I'm going to leave it here, but in the next audio, I should say, I'm going to share my personal descriptions on these, since I believe the definitions that are provided basically lack a historical context. And from that historical context, I think we can understand why free software exists, why open source software exists, and why proprietary software exists. What the motivations of the various parties who promote those various software licenses or software approaches. So anyway, we'll leave it there. If you're still here listening to me, I thank you for putting up with my somewhat weak voice at the moment. It's giving out on me a little bit, but I do trust that you enjoyed the content above, and I'm going to follow up in the next few weeks with part 2 of this. And as I said, we'll talk about the context, the historical context, and some personal descriptions on the 3 forms of software described previously. Anyway, I hope you have a good day, and good night, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Bye bye now.